Elon Musk stood in the grand foyer of his sleek, minimalist mansion in Los Angeles, staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. The lights of the city shimmered like a sea of stars, distant, beautiful, and unreachable to those living in the shadows. His gaze lingered, but for the first time in years, it wasn't the electric cars, space rockets, or even the latest technology that occupied his mind. It was something entirely different: the homeless people living just a few blocks away. Elon had built an empire from the ground up, revolutionizing industries, sending humans to space, and designing cars that ran on nothing but electricity. But now, in the quiet solitude of his multi-million-dollar home, he felt disconnected. The hum of his success no longer brought the thrill it once had. He transformed humanity's future with Tesla and SpaceX, but he hadn't transformed the world for everyone. There were people, thousands of them, living on the streets, struggling to survive day by day. And as a billionaire, Musk was used to asking the big questions. But now, one question haunted him. What does it really feel like to be homeless? It wasn't the first time he'd thought about it. He had donated to homeless shelters, spoken at charity events, and even talked about the issue in interviews. But he had always done it from a distance, a safe distance behind his wealth and privilege. He had seen the homeless. He had heard their stories. But had he truly understood? Could anyone really understand? Elon had a reputation for doing the unexpected, for taking risks that no one else would dare. So, as he stood there, his mind raced, and a strange, bold idea began to form. What if I went undercover? What if he could leave behind the comforts of his fortune, step out of his empire, and live as one of them? For a week, maybe two, just to feel it, to understand it from the inside. His hand gripped the edge of the glass railing as his heart began to race. The idea felt crazy, wild. But then again, crazy was what Musk did best. He had built rockets that defied gravity and created cars that defied convention. He wasn't afraid of risks. Not anymore. What's the worst that could happen? He muttered to himself, almost as if testing the idea out loud. And just like that, he made the decision. Without a second thought, he dialed up his assistant, Amanda, on his phone. Amanda, I need you to cancel all my meetings for the next week. And I need a few things arranged. I'm going undercover. I'm going to live as a homeless person. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by a confused, "Excuse me, sir? Did you just say homeless?" "Yeah," Elon replied, his voice steady, but there was a hint of something else: excitement, curiosity, maybe even fear. "I'll need to leave my mansion, give up my tech, and experience it firsthand. I want to know what it's really like." Amanda hesitated, unsure if Elon was joking or if he had lost his mind. But he wasn't joking. He could tell by the tone of his voice. After a moment, Amanda responded with a hesitant, "Okay, I'll start making arrangements." Elon hung up, feeling a rush of adrenaline. His heart raced, but he also felt a strange sense of peace settle in. This wasn't just about a publicity stunt or a quirky social experiment. This was about understanding, about seeing the world in a way he never had before. To truly grasp the reality of homelessness, he would need to leave everything behind: the luxury, the fame, the comforts, and start fresh. He couldn't help but think of his own childhood, growing up in South Africa. It hadn't been easy. His father had been harsh, and his peers had never understood him. But he'd always had a roof over his head, food on the table, and the drive to push forward. There were always resources to help him climb higher. The people on the streets didn't have that. They didn't have anything. That night, as he sat alone in his mansion, preparing for what was about to come, Elon took a deep breath and made a decision that would alter his life forever. The next day, he began the process of stripping away his identity. He cut his hair short, trimmed his beard, and started building a new persona. He would no longer be Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla. He would be someone else entirely, just another person trying to survive. He rummaged through his closets, pulling out old, worn clothes that he could pass off as his own. A dirty hoodie, ripped jeans, and old sneakers. For the first time in years, he didn't care about fashion. He didn't care about impressing anyone. All that mattered now was blending in. And the weight of that hit him harder than he expected. There was something deeply unsettling about the process. In a world where he was used to being seen, admired, even worshipped, he was about to become invisible, to step into the shadows where people would ignore him, look away, or worse, treat him like he didn't matter at all. But that was the point, to truly understand, to experience everything from the ground up. Elon walked to his front door, feeling the cool, night air wash over him as he stepped outside, leaving behind the world he had known. He looked back at his mansion, now feeling like a distant memory. A sense of nervous excitement gripped him. He didn't know what to expect. He didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk wasn't thinking about rockets, electric cars, or global domination. He was thinking about something else entirely, the streets. And with that thought, he stepped out into the unknown. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk had always been an enigma, even to himself. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, he had been the kind of child who never fit in. His classmates saw him as weird, even though he was undoubtedly brilliant. His father, Elon Musk, was a successful electromechanical engineer, but their relationship was strained, to say the least. Elon's parents had separated when he was just 9 years old, and the experience had marked him in ways that would shape his future. His mother, May, a model and dietitian, was nurturing, but it was his father's cold, distant nature that left deep scars. Growing up in South Africa, Elon had always been an outsider. His early years were filled with loneliness, and it wasn't until he discovered computers that he found something he could truly connect with. At the age of 12, Elon taught himself how to program and sold a basic video game called Blaster to a computer magazine for $500. It was a small victory, but it planted a seed in his mind that would grow into something far greater, the belief that anything was possible through technology. But even as a young boy, Elon had big dreams. He wasn't content with merely excelling in his studies or becoming rich through small entrepreneurial ventures. No, he aimed higher. He wanted to change the world. And while his dreams were grand, they were also solitary. He often felt disconnected from others, a feeling that only deepened as he grew older. When Elon left South Africa for Canada and later the United States, he hoped to escape the shadows of his past. He attended the University of Pennsylvania, earning degrees in physics and economics, but he wasn't interested in following the conventional path. Instead, he dropped out of a PhD program at Stanford after just 2 days, a decision that shocked his family and friends. He had a bigger mission, to shape the future, and that mission led him to Silicon Valley, where he would go on to create companies that revolutionized multiple industries. The rise of Tesla, SpaceX, and later ventures like Neuralink and the Boring Company was nothing short of extraordinary. Elon Musk wasn't just a CEO. He was a man on a relentless quest to change humanity's trajectory. He wanted to colonize Mars, eliminate fossil fuels, and transform the way we traveled and communicated. And with each new company and breakthrough, he seemed to inch closer to achieving those lofty goals. But despite his many accomplishments, Elon always felt as if something was missing. He had billions of dollars, the admiration of millions, and the respect of some of the world's most influential leaders. Yet, there was a nagging emptiness inside of him. His personal life had been tumultuous as well. He had married and divorced twice, and while his relationship with his children was a constant source of joy, the pressures of his public life often felt overwhelming. Through it all, Elon kept pushing forward. He believed in his vision of the future, a future where humanity was not bound by the limitations of Earth. But as his empire grew, so did the gap between him and the people who were actually affected by the problems he sought to solve. He couldn't help but wonder if, in all of his ambition, he had lost touch with the very people he was trying to help. And then came the idea that would change everything. Living undercover as a homeless person wasn't just a whim or a social experiment. It was a challenge he had set for himself to answer one profound question. What is it like to live in constant struggle, to have nothing, to be overlooked by society? It wasn't a question Musk had ever been able to answer from the safety of his boardrooms or his mansions. He had talked about social inequality, climate change, and the importance of empathy, but how could he truly understand the depths of those issues if he had never lived them? Was it possible for someone who had everything to truly comprehend what it felt like to have nothing? As Elon began to mentally prepare for his transformation, he couldn't help but reflect on how his life had been shaped by his past. He had spent so much of his career focused on the future, on space exploration and electric vehicles, that he had neglected the present. The people who lived in cities like Los Angeles, where street corners were lined with tents and cardboard signs. He had seen them, of course, but they had always been background noise in his life. His focus had been on the grand vision: saving the planet, sending rockets into space, creating a sustainable future. But now, as he prepared to step into the world of homelessness, he began to wonder if he could truly understand the real-world problems that needed attention right now. But how could a billionaire CEO possibly prepare for something like this? Elon had always thrived on solving problems, but this was a problem that couldn't be solved by algorithms, technological breakthroughs, or innovative business models. This was about human experience, raw and unfiltered. He spent the next few days preparing for the most challenging experiment of his life. He practiced walking like someone who had no place to go, who couldn't afford to look up. He learned how to talk like someone who had nothing left to lose. And with every passing day, he found himself thinking more and more about the people he would meet. The real people who lived on the streets, the ones whose stories were never told. For Elon, this wasn't just about doing something for the sake of publicity. It was about confronting the reality of the world he had always lived in but had never truly understood. As he sat in the empty silence of his mansion, he realized that perhaps this was the most important thing he would ever do. Not to fix anything, but to see it. To finally acknowledge that the world was far bigger than his vision of electric cars and Mars colonies. There were people out there, struggling in ways he could never have imagined, and it was time to listen to them. The next morning, he would leave it all behind: the mansion, the tech, the fame, and step into a world he had only observed from the outside. He had no idea what to expect. Would he be able to survive? Would he gain the insights he was seeking? Or would he find himself overwhelmed by a reality that was too raw, too painful to confront? All he knew was that, for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about rockets, space travel, or Mars. He was thinking about something far simpler and much more urgent: human connection. As he got into bed that night, he closed his eyes, bracing himself for the unknown. Tomorrow, his life would change forever. And with that thought, Elon Musk drifted off to sleep, knowing that his world was about to collide with a reality far different from anything he had ever known. The early morning light streamed through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. For a moment, Elon Musk just lay there, staring at the ceiling of the luxurious hotel room he had rented for the last night. It was a temporary stop, a final moment of comfort before he plunged headfirst into the unknown. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, each one dragging him closer to his new life. Or, more accurately, the life of a complete stranger. He had been preparing for this moment for days, but now that it was finally here, it felt more surreal than he had anticipated. What the hell am I doing? He thought. His mind raced as he lay there. He had read stories about people who had lived through unimaginable hardship, but he had never fully grasped what it meant. The idea of living as a homeless person wasn't just about stepping into a new role for a week. It was about rethinking everything he had taken for granted, from the food he ate to the freedom he had to just walk into any place he wanted. And now, he was about to strip away his identity completely. Elon had done his best to plan every detail, but no amount of preparation could change the fact that he was a man used to power, respect, and control. The idea of becoming invisible, of living among people who had none of those privileges, was daunting. He had always been seen. Now, he had to disappear. He stood up and looked at the pile of clothes in the corner of the room. The transformation had begun. There was nothing about these clothes that would mark him as the billionaire tech mogul he was. Old, torn jeans, a faded hoodie, and a pair of worn sneakers. It wasn't much, but it was everything he needed to blend in. He had already cut his hair short and trimmed his beard, leaving behind the polished image of Elon Musk and replacing it with the rugged look of someone who had nothing to their name. He stared at himself in the mirror for a long moment, unsure of what he was seeing. It wasn't just a new appearance, it was a new identity. He wasn't Elon Musk anymore. He was someone else entirely, someone who would be ignored by the people on the streets, passed by without a second thought. Can I even do this? He had doubts, of course. This was going to be hard, physically, mentally, and emotionally. The comforts of wealth were a far cry from the raw reality he was about to face. But deep down, he knew it was the only way to truly understand, to live it, to experience it with every sense, every fiber of his being. The mental shift he had to make was just as intense as the physical one. It wasn't just about being homeless for a short while. It was about shedding everything that had defined him. He grabbed his bag and stuffed the essentials inside. His fake ID, a few dollars in cash, and a water bottle. He couldn't take anything more than what he absolutely needed. The rest would be left behind, just like the identity of Elon Musk. When he walked out of the hotel room, it felt like the first step into a new reality. He stepped into the bustling streets of Los Angeles, where he was no longer a tech giant, but just another anonymous person in a crowd. The noise of the city surrounded him. Honking horns, chatter, and the constant rush of traffic. People walked by without even glancing his way, as if he didn't exist. It was both freeing and unsettling. He had never been a part of this world, and now he was immersed in it. As he moved through the crowds, he realized how quickly he was becoming invisible. His luxury clothing had been replaced by rags, and his usual confident stride was replaced with a cautious shuffle. He had never experienced this level of anonymity before. It was strange to not be recognized, to not be admired, or feared, or even approached. It was like he had vanished from existence, but at the same time, a strange sense of freedom washed over him. He no longer had to live up to expectations. There were no meetings to attend, no press conferences to prep for, no tech innovations to announce. There was just survival. He made his way toward a part of the city he had only ever seen from the comfort of a car or behind tinted windows. The streets were lined with run-down buildings, their windows boarded up, their doors locked. The sidewalks were cluttered with people whose lives were painted in shades of hardship, each one struggling to hold on to something, anything, in a world that had left them behind. Elon paused, taking in the scene. There were people sitting against the walls of buildings, some huddled together in makeshift groups for warmth. He noticed a woman with her child, her face gaunt, her eyes empty, her posture hunched in exhaustion. Further down, an older man with a grizzled beard sat on a cardboard box, staring at the ground. His clothes were tattered, his skin weathered from years of exposure to the harsh elements. These were the faces of the world Elon had only ever observed from a distance. They were people who had no place in his world. And yet, here he was, trying to be one of them, trying to understand what it felt like to live without the security of money, fame, or influence, trying to become just another person on the street. He found a spot on the sidewalk and sat down, his back pressed against the cool concrete. There, in the midst of the noise and chaos, he began to feel the weight of his decision. His thoughts swirled, but he didn't know where to start. The reality of homelessness wasn't just about survival. It was about being ignored, about existing in a world that didn't care. And then it hit him, the loneliness, the profound isolation that came with being on the streets. For all his achievements, for all the people he had touched and influenced, Elon Musk had never felt the kind of invisibility that came with being homeless. He wasn't sure how long he could bear it, but for now, all he could do was sit there and try to blend in. As he watched the world pass him by, Elon realized something. This wasn't just an experiment. This was his way of truly seeing, of understanding, of empathizing. And he hadn't even begun to scratch the surface. The sounds of Los Angeles swirled around him, an unrelenting tide of honking cars, conversations, and the hum of busy city life. But Elon Musk was no longer a part of it. He was now an observer, a silent figure blending into the sidewalk, his face obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt. It had been hours since he'd first sat down, trying to get a feel for the street life, and the reality of what he had set out to do was beginning to settle in like a weight on his chest. People walked past him without a second glance. No one seemed to notice the scruffy man on the curb. The homeless lived in a world of invisibility, an invisible class that society ignored until they became too much of a problem to avoid. Elon had never experienced anything like this before. His life had been built on the premise of being seen, of making an impact, of changing the world. But here, on the streets, he was nothing. The harshness of it was overwhelming. He tried to focus on the task at hand, getting through the day, staying hidden, surviving, but his mind kept drifting. He wondered about the people passing by. How many of them were truly aware of the hardships unfolding just steps away from them? How many of them even cared? There were mothers with children, workers in suits, tourists on their phones, all moving along, each with their own mission, their own world. And then there were the others, the people who had nowhere to go, no way out. Some of them had been there for days, weeks, or even months. Elon saw a man lying on a nearby bench, his body curled up, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, and he couldn't help but wonder how many nights he had spent there. How many nights had turned into years for him? And what about the woman sitting next to him? She had a hollow look in her eyes, staring off into space as though the world had already left her behind. Elon shifted uncomfortably on the sidewalk, his back against the cold concrete, and watched them all. The hunger, the exhaustion, the hopelessness. It was in their eyes, in the way they moved or didn't move. They had been forgotten by society, left to fend for themselves, left to be invisible. And for the first time, Elon understood what it meant to be discarded. As the day wore on, hunger gnawed at his stomach. He had barely eaten anything since he left the hotel that morning. In fact, he hadn't planned on eating at all. The point of this was to experience the rawness of homelessness, not just the physical discomfort, but the mental and emotional toll it took. But as the hours passed, the pangs of hunger became more and more difficult to ignore. He stood up slowly, adjusting to the weight of his new reality. The cold was creeping in, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pavement. Elon looked around, trying to get his bearings. He needed food, something to quench the gnawing hunger in his belly. But where? He couldn't just waltz into a restaurant and ask for a meal. He couldn't pay with his credit card, because he didn't have one. He didn't have anything. He looked down the street and saw a food truck parked near a busy intersection. People were lined up, waiting for their turn to order. Elon hesitated. Could he approach them? Could he risk the humiliation of being turned away? It wasn't just about the food. It was about the embarrassment, the feeling of being less than human, the stark contrast between him and the people around him, the people who walked by, oblivious to his struggle. He had spent his whole life in control, in charge. But now, he was vulnerable. He was just another person trying to survive. With a deep breath, Elon walked toward the truck, trying to mask his nerves. His worn clothes barely registered to the person behind the counter, but the eyes of the people in line flicked over him briefly, assessing his presence. As he stood there, waiting for his turn, he felt the heat of judgment in the air. They could see him. He could feel it in their eyes. He wasn't invisible anymore. When he finally reached the counter, the woman behind it glanced at him with a neutral expression. She didn't ask questions. She just took his order. Elon handed over the few crumpled dollars he had, and she gave him a small sandwich in return. It wasn't much, but it was something. He took the sandwich and walked away quickly, avoiding any further interaction. As he sat back down on the curb, he unwrapped it, taking small, hesitant bites. The food wasn't good, but it was a start. It was sustenance, and that was all that mattered. But as he chewed, something shifted in him. The physical act of eating, the simple task of satisfying hunger, was a reminder of just how far he had fallen from the world he knew. This wasn't a life anyone should have to live, but here he was, trying to survive on a sidewalk with a half-eaten sandwich in his hand. He thought about his past, the billions, the companies, the endless meetings and interviews. It felt like a distant memory, like a different life altogether. How had he gone from the founder of Tesla and SpaceX to this? Was this what it took to understand what real hardship felt like? Elon knew that he couldn't keep doing this indefinitely. He wasn't prepared for the depth of loneliness that came with being homeless. The isolation, the sense of being utterly alone in a crowded city, was like a weight on his chest. He couldn't escape it. No amount of wealth, no amount of influence could shield him from the cruel reality of what it meant to have nothing. As the night grew colder, Elon huddled into his hoodie for warmth. He tried to rest, to close his eyes and let sleep come. But every sound, every shuffle of feet, every passing voice kept him awake. It was impossible to relax. The fear of being discovered, the fear of being thrown out, kept him alert. But through it all, one thought kept echoing in his mind. I have to make it through this. I have to understand. And with that thought, he braced himself for another long night. The night felt endless. Elon sat huddled on the sidewalk, wrapped in his worn hoodie, trying to make himself as small as possible. The chill of the evening air cut through him, gnawing at his bones, a sharp reminder that he wasn't in control anymore. The city around him buzzed with life. Cars whizzed past, distant chatter echoed from street corners, and neon lights flickered from the signs of closed businesses. But for him, the world had become a blur of shadows and cold. He had thought he would be able to get some sleep, but the noises never ceased. Every passing car, every distant voice, every clink of a can or the shuffle of footsteps felt like a jolt to his already fragile sense of peace. Sleep was elusive, but the weight of exhaustion slowly started to drag him down. His mind raced with thoughts, none of them comforting. What was he doing here? What was the point of all of this? He had been so sure that this experience would provide him with valuable insights, but in the silence of the night, surrounded by the discomfort of his new existence, all he felt was frustration and fear. He looked around him. A few feet away, a man with a shopping cart full of belongings slept on a bed of old newspapers. His body was curled tightly, his face buried in a tattered jacket. Further down, an older woman sat against a building, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes vacant as if she had been sitting there for hours, lost in some unreachable place. They were all part of this world, the world he was now a part of, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here. This wasn't his life. But that was the point, wasn't it? To feel this, to experience the rawness, the vulnerability. He was so used to being the one with all the answers, the one with the control, the one who could fix everything. But here, in the cold of the night, he was just another person, ignored by most and struggling to survive. His stomach growled again, a reminder that food was scarce. The sandwich he had eaten earlier hadn't been enough. It wasn't about luxury, it was about survival. And survival in this world was different. It wasn't about money, tech, or space exploration. It was about finding a way to make it through the day, to get enough food, to find some shelter from the rain, to keep moving forward. Elon's eyes shifted over the street. He saw the people walking by, their heads down, their eyes focused on their own world, oblivious to the ones who had fallen through the cracks. A man in a suit passed by, his phone glued to his ear, too absorbed in his business to notice the woman sitting on the ground just feet away from him. A mother with a stroller hurried past, avoiding eye contact with the homeless woman on the corner. They all had somewhere to go, somewhere to be. But what about those who had no destination? What about those who had nowhere to go? The thought hit him with the force of a sledgehammer. This is the reality. This was the life of so many people, and he had only just begun to grasp it. He had spent years working to solve big problems. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with a new product or a tech breakthrough. This was something deeper, something more pervasive. This was about how society viewed those who had fallen on hard times, about how it cast them aside and ignored them. It was about survival, not in the physical sense, but in the emotional and social sense. The survival of one's dignity, one's sense of worth, in a world that constantly overlooked them. Elon closed his eyes, the tears threatening to rise, but he held them back. He had never felt so small in his life. He had been a leader, a visionary, a billionaire. But here, none of that mattered. None of it had prepared him for this. His mind drifted to his family, to his children. What would they think if they knew he was out here, on the streets, struggling to get through the night? They knew about his mission, about his work. But this was different. This was something so raw, so personal, that it felt like an entirely different world. The night wore on, each minute dragging by as if time itself had slowed. He was exhausted, but sleep remained out of reach. Every time he closed his eyes, the sounds of the city, the cars, the voices, the footsteps, cut through the darkness like an endless loop. The light from a nearby street lamp flickered, casting strange shadows on the sidewalk, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw something familiar in the darkness. A glimpse of the man he used to be, the man who had it all, the man who was invincible. But that man was gone now, replaced by someone else. A man who was learning to survive, to adapt, to let go of everything that defined him. At one point, someone walked by and dropped a few coins into his lap. Elon didn't move, too lost in his thoughts to respond. But when the person left, he picked up the coins slowly and examined them. It was a gesture, one of pity, one of charity, but it was also a reminder of the divide that existed between him and the world he was now a part of. The divide between the haves and the have-nots. The divide between those who could afford to ignore and those who had to fight for every scrap. The coins in his hand felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on him. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was what the money represented. It was the reminder that in this world, there were people who had power and people who didn't. And he was now one of those who didn't. But the one thing that kept him going was the lesson he was learning. The harshness of the world, the way it ignored the most vulnerable, had become all too clear to him. And as he sat there in the cold, the reality of it settled in. He wasn't just learning about homelessness. He was learning about himself, about his own capacity to adapt, to empathize, and to understand the struggles of those he had never truly seen before. But it wasn't easy. Nothing about this was easy. The night stretched on, the darkness beginning to lift as the first signs of dawn appeared on the horizon. Elon still sat there, his body aching, his mind tired, but resolute. He wasn't going to give up. He couldn't. Because in the end, he knew this. Real change didn't come from technology or ambition alone. It came from understanding. And the first step toward understanding was experiencing the world as it truly was. The first light of dawn was almost imperceptible, creeping in like the slow tide, hesitant yet persistent. The air still held the sting of the night, but it was beginning to warm as the sun started its ascent. Elon shifted, stiff and sore, from where he had been sitting on the cold sidewalk. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but the pain in his joints, his back, his legs, his neck, was even worse. He had never realized how much his body relied on comfort and care until now, until he had been stripped of everything he took for granted. As the world around him began to stir, Elon remained still, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He was used to making decisions in boardrooms, to working under pressure, to creating world-changing companies. But this was different. There was no grand strategy, no roadmap. There was only the stark reality of living on the streets. The constant need to stay alert, to move, to keep going even when everything inside you wanted to give up. He rubbed his eyes, blinking away the sleep that never truly came. His stomach growled again, a deep, uncomfortable reminder that he hadn't eaten since yesterday's half sandwich. But beyond the hunger, beyond the physical discomfort, the real challenge was the mental toll it was taking on him. The vulnerability, the shame, the constant feeling that he wasn't supposed to be here. It was as if the very act of sitting on this sidewalk, in this place, had erased everything he had ever achieved. But as the morning unfolded, something unexpected happened. A woman, perhaps in her mid-30s, walked up to him, her footsteps hesitant. Elon didn't notice her approach at first. He was too absorbed in his thoughts, too caught up in his own struggle. But when she stopped in front of him, he looked up, startled. She was dressed simply, in a faded jacket and jeans that had seen better days. But what struck him most was her eyes. They weren't filled with pity, as he had expected from most passers-by. Instead, they were full of something far more genuine. Compassion. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a warmth that felt almost out of place in this harsh environment. Elon stared at her, unsure of how to respond. What could he say? "No, I'm not okay. I'm cold, I'm hungry, and I don't belong here. But you don't need to know that." Instead, he simply nodded, not trusting himself to speak. She seemed to understand his hesitation. Without missing a beat, she reached into her bag and pulled out a wrapped sandwich. "I saw you sitting here last night. I thought you might need something to eat," she said, offering it to him. For a moment, Elon just stared at the sandwich in her hand. It wasn't much, just a simple breakfast sandwich, but to him, it felt like a lifeline. It felt like kindness, raw, unadulterated kindness that didn't ask for anything in return. He hadn't expected anyone to acknowledge him, let alone offer help. Most people just walked past, heads down, avoiding eye contact. This woman, however, had seen him. Really seen him. I don't know what to say, he muttered, feeling a lump form in his throat. This wasn't part of the plan. He wasn't supposed to need help. He wasn't supposed to feel helpless. It's okay, she replied with a gentle smile. We all need help sometimes. Elon took the sandwich from her hand, his fingers brushing hers for a split second. He couldn't remember the last time someone had treated him like a person, not just a celebrity or a business mogul. In his world, people didn't just give without expecting something in return. But here, in this moment, there were no expectations, just a simple act of human kindness. I'm grateful, he said, his voice hoarse. You don't know how much this means. The woman nodded, her expression softening. I know what it's like to be down and out. I've been there. I just try to help when I can. Elon took a deep breath, his chest tightening. He had spent so much of his life immersed in his work, in his pursuit of changing the world, that he had never truly understood what it meant to help someone in the most basic sense of the word. It wasn't about solving problems with technology. It wasn't about launching rockets into space or building electric cars. It was about seeing people, really seeing them, and giving them something, even if it was just a sandwich, that made a difference. He unwrapped the sandwich slowly and took a small bite. It tasted like nothing special, just eggs and cheese and bread. But in that moment, it was everything. It wasn't just food. It was the kindness of a stranger. It was a reminder that in the darkest corners of the world, there was still light. The woman gave him one last smile before turning to leave, disappearing into the morning crowd. Elon watched her go, her figure swallowed by the busy streets, and he felt something stir inside him, a feeling he hadn't expected to find out here in the cold, on the edge of society. Hope. For the first time since he'd started this experiment, he felt a glimmer of something more than survival. It wasn't just about enduring the harshness of the streets. It was about the connections people could make, the simple ways they could lift each other up when the world seemed to have turned its back. It was about kindness, about humanity. Elon knew that he couldn't stay on the streets forever. He wasn't foolish enough to believe that one random act of kindness would change everything. But in that moment, he understood something profound. The world didn't need more technology. It needed more of this, more compassion, more empathy. With renewed purpose, he stood up, wiping the crumbs from his hands. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He wasn't just here to learn about survival. He was here to understand, to become a part of something bigger than himself. As the morning light continued to warm the city, Elon felt a new sense of clarity. He wasn't just a billionaire tech mogul anymore. He was a man who had learned, the hard way, what it meant to be human. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important lesson of all. The city had begun to awaken fully as the morning moved into the late hours, the streets now buzzing with the sound of commuters heading to work, the rhythmic hum of the world resuming its pace. Elon stood on the corner of a busy intersection, the warmth of the sun now gently casting its glow on the sidewalk. It was a stark contrast to the cold of the previous night, and yet, despite the change in temperature, a lingering heaviness weighed on his chest. The act of kindness from the woman had left an impression on him, one that lingered far longer than he had anticipated. He hadn't expected to feel this. Certainly not here. Not in the heart of a city that had always been just a distant backdrop to his work, his innovations, his life. But now, it felt like everything was shifting. His understanding of the world was beginning to unravel in a way that he didn't know how to handle. As the hours passed, he began to see the contrasts more clearly, the luxury and abundance of the world in which he used to move, and the harshness and suffering of the life he was now living. He thought about the people who hurried past him each day, ignoring the homeless, turning their faces away from the struggle. Some people treated him like a ghost, others like an inconvenience, and there were those who simply didn't notice at all. But he noticed, and he couldn't stop noticing. By mid-afternoon, The heat of the day had started to make his clothes stick to his skin, the grime of the streets accumulating on his shoes and hands. His stomach ached again, reminding him that he had yet to eat anything substantial since the sandwich earlier. The hours stretched on, and he was starting to feel the weight of the experience more than he had expected. It wasn't just the hunger, the physical discomfort. It was the sense of futility, the constant awareness of his invisibility. But then, as if in direct contrast to that overwhelming sense of being forgotten, he spotted a man sitting on a nearby park bench, playing guitar. His fingers moved with practiced grace, creating a melody that cut through the noise of the city around him. His clothes were ragged, his face weathered by time. But his music, it was something that cut through the cold air and touched the hearts of anyone who paused long enough to listen. Elon found himself drawn to the man, his curiosity piqued by the rawness of the moment. He approached cautiously, standing a few feet away, unsure of what to say. The man's eyes were closed as he played, lost in his own world of music, oblivious to the passing crowd. Elon didn't know what he expected, but he certainly hadn't expected the strange wave of warmth that washed over him as he listened. After a few minutes, the man finished his song, and the city returned to its usual rhythm. Elon remained standing there for a while, staring at the man. The music had stirred something inside him. It wasn't just the sound. It was the way the music seemed to transcend everything else. The man didn't care about the onlookers, or whether anyone was listening. He played for himself, for his own survival. Elon felt a pull inside him, a deeper understanding of the life he was now living. The song had made him realize something. These people, the ones who seemed lost or invisible to the world, they had their own stories, their own reasons for being where they were. They weren't just figures on the street, begging for a handout. They were human beings with lives, experiences, and dreams that had somehow been forgotten by the world. He walked up to the man, uncertain of how to engage. He wasn't even sure why he was doing it. Maybe it was the need for a connection, something to remind him that he wasn't entirely alone. "Hey," Elon said, his voice a little hoarse from the dust of the streets. "That was beautiful." The man looked up at him, his eyes sharp, a quiet curiosity in them. He studied Elon for a moment, and then, without saying a word, he nodded in acknowledgement and returned to his guitar. The gesture felt almost like a small validation, an unspoken recognition that he had been seen. For the next few minutes, Elon watched the man play, the melody washing over him. The sounds were comforting, in a way that he couldn't explain. It was as though the music was speaking to him, telling him things that words could not. And then, as if it were meant to be, the man stopped playing and placed his guitar beside him. Without looking up, he said quietly, "You want to sit down?" Elon hesitated for a moment before nodding. He had no real reason not to, no logical explanation for his decision to sit beside a stranger who had nothing to offer but a few notes of music. But something inside him told him that this was important, that this small act of connection was worth more than all the success, all the fame, all the money he had ever known. He sat down beside the man on the park bench, and for a while, they said nothing. The hum of the city surrounded them, but in that brief, shared silence, Elon felt something unexpected, a sense of peace. It wasn't the type of peace that came from luxury or success. It wasn't the satisfaction of a job well done, or the thrill of creating something new. It was a different kind of peace, one that came from simply being present, from existing in a world that was often too busy to notice the ones who needed it the most. As he sat there, a thought struck him. For all his wealth, his accomplishments, the life he had built, he had never really understood the value of simple things like kindness, connection, or the power of being seen. But now, in this moment, he understood. It wasn't about what he could do for the world. It was about what he could do for the people in it. And, maybe, that was the first real lesson he was learning. After a while, the man stood up, picking up his guitar and slinging it over his shoulder. "Take care of yourself," he said, offering Elon a brief, knowing smile. "It's tough out here." Elon nodded, watching the man walk away, his guitar case bouncing against his back. The words hung in the air long after he was gone, echoing in Elon's mind like a bell that refused to stop ringing. It was tough out here. And the hardest part of all was realizing that it wasn't just the streets that were hard. It was the way the world had turned its back on so many of its own. Elon sat there for a while longer, letting the lessons of the day sink in. The experience wasn't over yet, but for the first time, he knew it was changing him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was clear now. He had to keep going. He had to keep learning. As the sun began its slow descent in the sky, the streets of the city shifted again, growing more restless as the evening rush picked up. The sounds of honking cars, chattering crowds, and the general noise of a city that never sleeps reverberated through the air. Elon sat on the same park bench where he had shared the quiet moments with the guitar-playing man, but his mind was far from peaceful. The encounter with the stranger had left a lingering sense of reflection. He had learned more in the past 48 hours on the streets than he had ever imagined. His assumptions about the homeless, about poverty, about the people he had spent his life avoiding or trying to fix, were starting to unravel. He realized how much of his life had been shaped by privilege, by a society that rewarded innovation and success, but had no answers for those who fell through the cracks. He had spent his entire career creating technology to push the boundaries of space, transportation, and energy. He had been driven by the belief that he could change the world, that his work could make it better. But now, in the midst of the city's hustle and bustle, he was coming to a bitter realization. Innovation and ambition couldn't solve the deepest problems of the human experience, not in a way that truly mattered. His mind drifted back to the woman who had shared her sandwich with him, and to the man with the guitar. Those were the moments that had hit him hardest. The moments of connection, of shared humanity, that he had always overlooked in his pursuit of bigger, more tangible goals. Here, on the streets, there was no tech to make life easier, no clean energy to power the city, no spaceships to launch into the stars. There was only survival, and there was only each other. But, as Elon sat there, feeling the weight of his growing awareness, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice. "Hey man, are you okay?" Elon looked up. A young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, stood in front of him, looking down with a mix of concern and curiosity. His clothes were worn, but not as ragged as some of the others Elon had seen. The man's eyes were kind but wary, as if he had seen too much of the world's indifference and learned to keep his distance. Elon was caught off guard. He hadn't expected anyone to talk to him, not after he had learned to blend into the background, to become just another faceless figure among so many others on the street. But here was someone who had noticed him. Really noticed him. "I'm fine," Elon replied automatically, the words coming out more sharply than he intended. He quickly softened his tone, realizing that he was being defensive. "I'm just figuring things out." The young man took a seat on the bench next to him, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I get that. You look like you've been out here a while." Elon nodded, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't like he had a good excuse for why he was sitting on a park bench, wearing dirty clothes and avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by. He had wanted to know what it felt like to be invisible, to experience the world from the other side. But now, as he sat beside this stranger, the reality of his own vulnerability was staring him in the face. "My name's Jake," the young man said, offering a hand. "What's yours?" "Elon," he replied, shaking the hand reluctantly. It felt strange to be using his real name, to be so exposed, but it also felt real, like he was finally shedding the layers of his old identity. "What brings you here?" Jake asked, the question genuine but full of an underlying curiosity. It was a question Elon had been asking himself for the past few hours. What was he doing here? What was the point of all this? Elon started, but the words got caught in his throat. What could he possibly say? "I'm just trying to understand." Jake didn't seem to question him further. Instead, he nodded like he understood exactly what Elon meant. "Yeah, I think that's what we all want," Jake said quietly. "We're just trying to understand what happened, how we ended up here." Elon looked over at Jake, his gaze searching. "How did you end up here?" he asked before he could stop himself. Jake seemed to hesitate for a moment, then sighed, his eyes lowering to the ground. "A lot of us end up here the same way. You lose your job, you lose your house, you lose your family, one thing after another. And before you know it, you're just Here. Trying to make it work. Elon absorbed the words carefully, letting them sink in. He could never fully understand what it was like to be homeless. Not in the way Jake did, but for the first time, he could begin to grasp just how fragile everything could be. How easily someone's life could spiral downward when the safety nets that most people took for granted were suddenly ripped away. "I'm sorry," Elon said softly, not sure if his words were enough to convey the empathy he felt. "I didn't know." Jake gave him a small, rueful smile. "Most people don't, but it's not your fault. No one ever talks about how easy it is to slip through the cracks, how fast it all happens. One minute you're doing okay, and the next, you're fighting to survive." The words hit Elon with a force he wasn't prepared for. They were the reality he had never seen, never truly understood. He had been so focused on the future, on innovation and technology, that he had never stopped to think about the people who were getting left behind in the rush. The people who weren't part of the conversation. The people who didn't have the same chances. "What do you do when you're out here?" Elon asked, wanting to understand more. The question was almost embarrassing, as if he was asking for a way to get out of this situation, as if he expected some magic solution. Jake shrugged. "You do what you can. You beg for change, try to find food, stay out of trouble. Some days are better than others. But most days, you just keep going." Elon thought about that. There was no grand solution, no quick fix. There was just surviving. There was just enduring. And he realized, for the first time, how small the world really was. How many people, just like Jake, had been forgotten. "I want to help," Elon said, his voice low but determined. The words felt strange on his tongue, but they felt right too. For once, they weren't coming from a place of business or competition. They were coming from something deeper. "I don't know how, but I want to make a difference." Jake looked at him with a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. "You want to help? Really?" Elon nodded, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what kind of help he could offer yet. He wasn't even sure where to start. But he knew that he couldn't keep pretending that he didn't see what was in front of him. He couldn't keep pretending that the world was okay, just because he had a little bit of power, a little bit of wealth. "I want to figure this out," Elon said, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to make sure no one else feels like they've been forgotten." Jake met his gaze, his expression guarded but thoughtful. "Good luck, man. It's not easy, but it's worth fighting for." Elon stood up, feeling a sense of resolve settle over him. The journey wasn't over yet, but it had only just begun. The night was quickly falling, and with it, the city took on a different energy. The once bustling streets began to empty as the lights of towering buildings blinked on, casting a neon glow over the sidewalks. The constant hum of cars and foot traffic seemed to slow, replaced by a quieter rhythm, the kind that whispered to those who were still awake to listen closely. Elon, still sitting on the same park bench, had begun to sense a deep solitude, a sense of separation that he hadn't anticipated. It was strange, feeling so disconnected from the world he had once dominated, a world that seemed to be so far removed from this gritty, cold part of the city. Jake had left not long before, disappearing into the maze of shadows, a faint smile lingering on his face as if offering Elon a shred of hope. And for the first time in days, Elon found himself grateful for the silence. The quiet allowed him to process what had happened, what he was learning. But just as he began to settle into the solitude, a figure appeared from the darkness. "Hey, are you lost?" Elon looked up to see a woman standing a few feet away, her face partially obscured by the glow of a streetlight. She wore a thick coat, her boots scraping against the pavement as she shifted from one foot to the other, eyes scanning him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "No," Elon replied instinctively. "I'm just thinking." The woman smiled, not an uncertain or condescending smile, but one that felt warm, understanding, and genuine. She stepped closer and took a seat next to him on the bench, as though she were accustomed to these kinds of encounters. Elon didn't know why, but there was something about her presence that was immediately comforting. "I've seen you around," she said after a beat, her voice steady and kind. "You're new to this area, right?" Elon nodded slowly, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." She chuckled softly, her tone a mix of humor and empathy. You look like you've been here longer than you've let on. Elon's brow furrowed. You could say that. People around here start to notice faces after a while, she explained, her voice gentle but knowing. The regulars, the ones who aren't in a hurry. We watch each other. See if anyone's struggling. If someone needs help. Elon let her words hang in the air, quietly processing. He had seen the same thing happen in the corporate world. People watching, observing, measuring others. But this was different. This wasn't about power or status. It was about survival. It was about seeing each other in a way he hadn't allowed himself to see before. Can I ask you something? She continued, her eyes softening as she turned to him. Sure, Elon replied, his curiosity piqued by her unexpected interest. Why are you out here? Her question was direct, cutting through the pretenses. There was no judgment in her tone, just genuine inquiry. Elon paused. He hadn't expected to be asked this, at least not so openly. What was the right answer? Could he even articulate it? I guess I'm trying to learn, he said quietly, glancing down at his hands, the dirt still visible from the day's journey. I wanted to understand what it's like to be in a place where the world forgets you. Her expression softened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, recognition. I get it, she said simply, but you're more than just your situation. You've got more to give than you realize. Elon felt a strange knot in his stomach, the weight of her words settling heavily. More than just his situation. Could she see through the walls he had built up so meticulously over the years? The walls that protected him, that kept him safe from the vulnerabilities he had never wanted to face? For the first time since starting this experiment, Elon felt as if he were no longer just playing a part. He wasn't simply the billionaire pretending to be homeless. He was something more. Someone who needed to learn, who needed to grow. I'm not sure what I have to give, he admitted, his voice quieter now, the sharp edges of his usual self-assuredness gone. She smiled, and it wasn't patronizing. It was understanding. We all have something. But sometimes, you have to go through the hard stuff to see it clearly. Life has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even if you don't think you're ready for it. Elon didn't know how to respond, the weight of her words heavy on him. But before he could say anything else, she stood up and brushed off her jacket, as if she had made a decision. You know, you should come with me, she said suddenly, surprising him. I know a place where you can get a real meal, not just what's handed out on the streets. If you're serious about understanding what this life is like, you might want to get to know people who've been living it longer than you have. Elon's first instinct was to decline. He didn't want to owe anyone anything. He didn't want to feel more indebted, more vulnerable. But a part of him, an unexpected, quiet part of him, wanted to say yes. He had been out here for days, isolated, wandering, and he still hadn't fully understood. He didn't know what he would find at this place, but he knew that it was time to push forward, to stop pretending he could do this alone. Where is it? He asked, standing up to follow her. She smiled again, almost as if she knew he was going to ask that very question. Just a few blocks away. It's nothing fancy, but it's honest. They began walking through the dimming streets, Elon following the woman's confident stride. As they passed by shops and apartment buildings, the city felt both large and small. The towering skyscrapers above him felt distant, foreign. He had built them, created the machines that shaped the very world they represented. But now, standing on the streets below them, he felt insignificant. His fame, his wealth, it didn't matter here. The place the woman led him to wasn't much. It was a small building tucked between two larger, more glamorous businesses. The sign outside said Community Kitchen, simple, unassuming. But as they entered, Elon was immediately struck by the warmth. The scent of hearty meals, the soft murmur of conversations, and the sound of laughter. There were no cameras, no executives, no flashy advertisements. There were just people, real people, coming together to share what little they had. The woman turned to him, a knowing smile on her lips. This is where the real work happens. This is where people change things, just by showing up and being present. Elon looked around, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. In this simple space, people were connected, and he realized, for the first time, That connection was the thing that truly mattered. The warmth inside the community kitchen wrapped around Elon like a blanket, comforting him in a way he hadn't realized he needed. The smell of stew simmering in large pots filled the air, and the low hum of voices blended into a soft melody of human connection. People of all ages, from young children to the elderly, sat at long wooden tables, sharing meals, stories, and moments of genuine companionship. It was a world far removed from the one he had come from, and yet, in this space, there was something familiar, something that felt more real than anything he had experienced in years. The woman who had led him here introduced him to a few people as they walked past the tables. "This is Leah," she said, pointing to a middle-aged woman with short, curly hair and a bright smile. "She runs this place, makes sure everything keeps going. And over there is Mark, a regular who's been helping out for years." Elon nodded politely, shaking hands with the few people she introduced him to. Everyone seemed warm, welcoming, people who were, by all appearances, just as much in need of support as he was. Yet, instead of seeing desperation, he saw resilience. Each face had its own story, its own struggles, but also a sense of pride. They were survivors. They didn't allow the circumstances to define them. The woman turned to him after making a few more introductions. "Come on, I'll show you where we sit. We'll grab some food. I think you're going to need it after all those days on the street." Elon followed her toward the serving counter, where large pots of food were being ladled into bowls by volunteers. He realized then just how much of his own life had been driven by the need to control, to build, to create. Yet here, in this modest kitchen, people were creating something far more important, a community. Once they had their bowls of stew and bread, the woman led him to a table at the far end of the room. As they sat, she smiled at him. "I can see it in your eyes. You're thinking about things in a new way." Elon hesitated, taking a spoonful of the soup. It was basic. He could tell it was made from simple ingredients, nothing extravagant. But it tasted real, honest in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. The warmth of the food seemed to seep into his bones, providing a comfort he hadn't realized he was lacking. "Yeah," Elon admitted, setting his spoon down, "I'm starting to see things differently. I've spent so much of my life working toward something, thinking that fixing the big things would solve everything. But I'm realizing now that it's the small things, the connections, the people, that make all the difference." The woman nodded thoughtfully, taking a sip of her own soup. "It's easy to forget that. We get so wrapped up in the big picture, the big changes, that we forget about the moments that matter. The moments where people really connect." Elon leaned back in his chair, looking around the room. He had thought he could change the world with his inventions, with his plans for Mars and electric cars. But the truth was, he had been missing something crucial. He had been so focused on the future that he had forgotten the importance of the present. The woman continued, her voice quiet but steady. "People like us, the ones who struggle, we don't need the world to change overnight. We just need a hand up. We need someone to show us that we're not alone, that someone cares." Elon's mind was spinning. For so long, he had been a man of ideas, of grand visions and big dreams. But now, sitting here with these people, he was beginning to understand that change didn't have to be massive to be meaningful. Maybe, just maybe, the true power of change came from the quiet moments of human connection, the small acts of kindness, and the willingness to see one another as equals, regardless of their circumstances. "I never realized how much I've taken for granted," Elon said softly, more to himself than to her. "I've been so caught up in my own world. I've built rockets, cars, and factories, but I haven't taken the time to really look at the people around me, the ones who need help." The woman's gaze softened, and she reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "It's not about feeling guilty. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together. It's about finding ways to help each other out. If everyone could learn to look at the world this way, maybe we'd all be a little better off." Elon felt something stir within him, a sense of clarity that had been elusive for years. He had built his fortune by looking at the world as a problem to be solved, as a challenge to be overcome with innovation and technology. But now, sitting here with this woman, and with the others in the room, he realized that not everything could be fixed with gadgets and blueprints. Some things required understanding, empathy, and a willingness to be present. Some things required simply listening. As the evening wore on, the conversation at the table shifted. Other people came and went, some with stories to share, others content to simply enjoy the company of others. Elon listened, absorbing their experiences, their pain, their resilience. He felt a sense of deep gratitude for these moments. These were the moments that were shaping him, reshaping him into someone he hadn't expected to become. The woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. You know, we're always looking for help here. If you want to give back, if you want to make a difference, we could use someone with your skills. Elon blinked, surprised. My skills? She smiled. You've got a lot of talent, Elon. You've built some of the most innovative technologies the world has ever seen. But sometimes, the biggest breakthroughs aren't about the next big thing. Sometimes, the breakthrough is about helping people, about sharing what you know in ways that can change lives. Elon felt a rush of emotions flood over him. Doubt, uncertainty, but also excitement. He had been so focused on his own ambitions, his own mission to revolutionize the world in his image. But now, here was an opportunity to change lives in a way that mattered in the deepest sense. He didn't know what it would look like yet, but he knew he couldn't walk away from it. I'll think about it, Elon said, his voice sincere. She smiled again, a smile that felt like a promise. Take your time, but just know, there's always a place here for someone who wants to make a difference, even in small ways. Elon nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities. There was work to be done, and he was starting to see it more clearly than ever before. He had come here to learn, but what he hadn't expected was to find a new purpose. And now, the journey ahead seemed a little less uncertain, a little more hopeful. The next few days felt like a blur to Elon. His time in the community kitchen had opened up a floodgate of emotions and realizations that he couldn't quite process all at once. His days had been a whirlwind of thoughts, conversations, and moments of reflection. And yet, despite the overwhelming nature of it all, he couldn't deny that something inside him had shifted. He wasn't the same person who had first walked into that small building seeking answers. Now, as he sat on a bench in the park across from the kitchen, the city's noises, the cars, the sirens, the distant chatter, seemed muffled. It was as though a layer of noise had been peeled away, allowing him to hear his own thoughts more clearly. His mind kept returning to the conversations he'd had with the people there, the ones who had shared their stories, their struggles, and their hope. It was clear to him now, they didn't want pity, they didn't want handouts or charity. They wanted respect. They wanted to feel like they mattered, like they were seen for who they were, not just their circumstances. It was a stark contrast to the world he had known, a world where success and failure were often measured by how much money you had or what you could build. As he sat there, lost in thought, the familiar face of the woman who had first brought him to the community kitchen appeared before him. She was walking toward him, a purposeful stride in her step. She smiled when she saw him, her eyes bright with the same warmth that had initially drawn him to her. "I thought I might find you here," she said, taking a seat beside him on the bench. Elon smiled back, though it was a more subdued expression than usual. "I needed some space to think. A lot's been on my mind." She nodded knowingly. "I get it. It's not easy, is it? Facing things you've been avoiding for so long." "No, it's not." Elon sighed, glancing at the ground as if it could provide some answers. "I've spent so much of my life focused on building things, on achieving the next big thing. But now, I'm starting to wonder if I've been building the wrong things all along." The woman didn't say anything right away. She simply sat beside him, letting the silence hang between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, more like a shared understanding that words weren't always needed in moments like this. After a few moments, she finally spoke. "Sometimes, the biggest breakthroughs don't come from the work we do alone. They come from the relationships we build, from the people we choose to lift up, even when we're struggling ourselves." Elon looked at her, intrigued. "But how do you know who to lift up? How do you know who really needs help?" She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "It's not always obvious, is it? The people who need help don't always show it. But that's why it's important to pay attention, to listen, to see people not as problems to be solved, but as humans who deserve compassion and dignity. Elon felt a stirring in his chest, a mixture of realization and guilt. He had spent so much time trying to fix problems, thinking that if he just created the right technology, everything would fall into place. But here, in this community, he had seen something else, something far more powerful than any product he could design. He had seen the power of human connection, of showing up for one another without expectation. "I think I understand," he said slowly, "but I don't know where to start. I've always been about big ideas, about doing things that no one else has done before. But this is different. It's personal. It's about people. And I don't know if I'm equipped to help in the right way." The woman smiled gently. "You don't have to have all the answers right away. Nobody does. What matters is that you're willing to try, to show up, to be present. And maybe, in time, you'll find a way to make a difference. It doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be real." Elon nodded, a deep sense of relief washing over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to be the genius who fixed everything. He just needed to start somewhere. And that somewhere could be as simple as offering a helping hand, sharing a meal, or listening when someone needed to talk. "That's what I've been missing," he admitted, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. "I've been so focused on creating things that I lost sight of what really matters, the people, the ones who need help, who need support." The woman placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression warm and reassuring. "Exactly. And you don't have to do it alone. You've already started by being here, by seeing things from a different perspective. That's more than most people ever do." Elon felt a sense of gratitude toward her that was hard to put into words. She had been the one to show him this new way of thinking, to help him see the world in a way that was both humbling and empowering. She had given him the space to ask the hard questions and allowed him to find the answers on his own. As they sat there, the city around them continued to pulse with life, but Elon no longer felt detached from it. Instead, he felt a growing sense of connection to the world around him, an awareness that he had never fully appreciated before. "I think I'm ready," he said after a long pause, his voice filled with determination. "I'm ready to do something real, something that makes a difference, even if it's small." She grinned, her eyes lighting up with pride. "I knew you would be. It's all about taking that first step, Elon. The rest will follow." As they both stood up from the bench, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose fill him. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. A path that was not about technology or innovation, but about people, about making a tangible impact on the lives of those who needed it most. And as they walked back toward the community kitchen, Elon knew that this was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon had never been one to shy away from challenges, but this was different. This wasn't about engineering marvels or groundbreaking technology. It was about connecting with people on a deeply human level. As he walked alongside the woman, whose name he learned was Clara, a quiet sense of purpose began to build within him. The weight of the journey ahead was starting to feel less like a burden and more like an opportunity to make something real, something lasting. When they reached the community kitchen, Clara led him inside, where the familiar hum of activity greeted them. People were bustling around, volunteers dishing out food, talking to the guests, and offering their company. The warm aroma of food filled the air, creating an atmosphere of comfort and belonging. Elon paused at the entrance for a moment, taking in the sight before him. He'd been here before, but this time, he saw it differently. It wasn't just a place of need. It was a place of hope. A place where people weren't defined by their circumstances, but by their ability to come together and support one another. "You're thinking," Clara said with a knowing smile as she walked toward the counter. "I can tell. It's all starting to click, isn't it?" Elon nodded, still processing everything. "It is. It's hard to explain, but there's something about being here. Something about this community. It's real." Clara handed him a bowl of soup, and they both took seats at a table in the corner, away from the bustling activity. As they sat down, Elon felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. It wasn't just the food or the warmth of the kitchen that had made him feel welcome. It was the people, their stories, their strength, their resilience. They weren't asking for charity. They were asking for connection. I've been thinking about what you said, Elon began after a few moments of quiet, about lifting others up. I've spent so much of my life trying to build things, trying to make the world better through technology. But what I've realized is that change doesn't always come from building something new. It comes from making people feel seen, making them feel heard. Clara looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. Exactly. It's about finding ways to meet people where they are, to offer them something that helps them feel valued. And sometimes, that's all it takes to start a ripple effect. Elon felt a surge of determination. He had always been a visionary, but the vision had often been clouded by his obsession with progress, with perfection. Now, for the first time, he saw the potential for change in a different way, not as something that could be engineered or manufactured, but as something that could be nurtured through genuine care and connection. I want to help, Elon said, his voice steady with purpose. I don't know exactly how, but I want to contribute in a meaningful way. I've got the resources, the knowledge, but more importantly, I've got the desire to make a real impact. Clara smiled, the warmth in her eyes undeniable. I'm glad to hear you say that. You've got something special to offer, Elon. It's not just about money or technology. It's about being willing to put in the work, to show up when it matters. And you're already doing that. The conversation continued as they ate, discussing the ways in which the community kitchen operated and how it impacted the lives of those who walked through its doors. Clara explained that the kitchen wasn't just about feeding people. It was about providing a sense of dignity, offering a space where people could gather without feeling ashamed of their circumstances. As they spoke, Elon's mind began to race with ideas. He thought about how he could apply his skills, his knowledge, to help this community grow, to help it thrive. He imagined creating partnerships, developing initiatives that could provide not only food but also resources for education, job training, and mental health support. There were so many possibilities, so many ways to make a difference. But he knew that the first step was simple: listening. He needed to understand the real needs of the people in this community before he could offer any solutions. He had to learn to approach this from a place of humility, without assuming he knew what was best for them. Clara, he said, his voice filled with thoughtfulness, I want to do more than just contribute money or resources. I want to get involved. I want to be part of the work that's being done here. I want to help listen to the needs of the people, to understand what they really need. And then, we can figure out how to support them in the best way possible. Clara looked at him, clearly impressed by his sincerity. That's exactly what we need. Someone who's willing to listen. Someone who's willing to roll up their sleeves and be a part of the work. You don't have to have all the answers, Elon. You just need to be present. And that's more than enough. As they finished their meal, Elon felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had come to the community kitchen as a man with a mission, a billionaire on a journey to test the limits of his own empathy. But now, he felt like he was becoming part of something bigger, a movement of people who were dedicated to making real change, not through flashy innovations or giant projects, but through kindness, understanding, and connection. It wasn't about solving everything at once. It was about making small, consistent steps toward a better future. A future where everyone had the chance to thrive, to find their place, to feel valued. Over the next few weeks, Elon threw himself into the work. He began by volunteering, spending time with the people who came through the kitchen, listening to their stories and learning from their experiences. He worked alongside Clara and the other volunteers, helping prepare meals, distributing supplies, and offering whatever expertise he could. Slowly but surely, Elon started to feel a deeper connection to this community. He saw firsthand the difference that a kind word or a shared meal could make in someone's life. He watched as people who had once been strangers to one another began to form bonds, to support one another in ways that went beyond mere survival. The more he immersed himself in this world, the more he realized that his true purpose wasn't just about making the world a better place through technology. It was about making the world a better place through human connection. He had spent so long trying to change the world with machines and ideas, but now he was beginning to see that the real change came from people, from the relationships we built and the kindness we shared. And as he continued his journey, Elon knew that he wasn't just changing the lives of others, he was changing his own life as well. Elon spent the next few weeks fully immersed in the work at the community kitchen. Every day felt like an unfolding chapter in a new story, a story he hadn't expected to be a part of, but one he was finding impossible to walk away from. Clara had introduced him to some of the other regular volunteers, many of whom had been coming to the kitchen for years, offering their time and skills to help. There was Jane, a retired teacher who now taught literacy classes to people who had dropped out of school long ago. There was Alex, a former mechanic who now helped with job placement services, working tirelessly to get people back on their feet. Then there was Daniel, a young man who had been homeless himself but had now become one of the kitchen's most passionate advocates, using his experiences to help others who were going through similar struggles. Each of them had a story. Each of them had a reason for being there, for dedicating their time and energy to this place. And it wasn't about charity. It was about building relationships, forging a sense of belonging in a world that often felt indifferent to their struggles. Elon had quickly learned that in this world, the work wasn't about handouts. It was about empowerment. The kitchen wasn't just a place for people to get food. It was a place where people came together, where they could access resources, gain new skills, and, most importantly, find hope. It was a space where their dignity was respected, where they were more than just their circumstances. And Elon had started to see that the very thing he had been looking for, something meaningful, something real, was happening right here, every day, in this small kitchen, in these relationships. One afternoon, Clara pulled Elon aside as he was about to start washing dishes. She looked at him with that familiar, knowing smile. "Elon, I've been thinking about something," she began, her tone serious but kind. "You've been an incredible help here, and the people appreciate you. But I think there's more you could do. You have skills, resources, and connections that could really help us take things to the next level." Elon set the dish down and turned toward her. "What do you mean?" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I think it's time to expand. We've helped a lot of people here, but there's more we could be doing, more we could offer. But to do that, we need more space, more resources, more funding to offer programs that teach skills, provide mental health services, and," she looked directly at him, a spark of hope in her eyes, "help people reintegrate into society with dignity." Elon felt a pang in his chest. He had spent so many years focused on innovation, on building the next big thing. But what Clara was suggesting wasn't about innovation in the traditional sense. It wasn't about a shiny new product or a billion-dollar idea. It was about building infrastructure, about creating something that could stand the test of time, something that could lift people up and give them the tools to change their own lives. "Okay," Elon said, his voice quieter than usual, his mind working through the possibilities. "Let's do it. Let's make this place a model for others. We can start by offering job training, mental health resources, and support programs for families." Clara's eyes widened with surprise. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Elon replied, his words filled with a newfound sense of conviction. "I don't want to just throw money at this. I want to help build something lasting, something that can grow, that can become a beacon for others." Clara smiled, a tear of joy welling up in her eyes. "I knew you had it in you, Elon. I knew you'd see the power of what we're building here." They spent the next few days meeting with other volunteers, discussing ideas, and coming up with a plan to expand the kitchen's efforts. Elon reached out to people in his network, those in the tech world, in the nonprofit sector, and even some of his old business associates, asking them to lend a hand in making this vision a reality. At first, the response was cautious. Some questioned whether Elon's involvement was genuine, whether he was just trying to make a splash with a feel-good project. But as the meetings continued, and as Elon poured his heart into the project, something started to shift. People began to believe in the idea. They saw the impact it was having on the community and began to understand that this wasn't just another charity effort, it was a movement. In a meeting with a potential donor, Elon found himself explaining what had become his driving force: human connection. "The technology and resources I've worked on for years," he told the donor, "are incredible. They can change the world, no doubt. But what I've learned is that real, lasting change doesn't come from technology alone. It comes from people. It comes from building relationships, providing opportunities, and showing people that they matter. That's what we're doing here. We're not just giving out food. We're giving people the tools they need to build better lives. The donor, a woman with a background in social services, nodded slowly. I see what you're saying. It's not just about handouts. It's about empowerment, about giving people the chance to stand on their own feet. Elon smiled. Exactly. And that's what I want to help build. By the end of that week, the kitchen had secured a substantial donation. With Elon's backing, they were able to expand the building, set up new programs, and start reaching out to more people who could benefit from the resources. It was the beginning of something bigger than any of them had imagined. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the relationships they were building, the trust they were earning. People in the community began to see this new initiative not as charity, but as a partnership. And that, Elon realized, was the key to lasting change. A sense of mutual respect, where everyone had something to offer and everyone had something to gain. As the weeks passed, the community kitchen transformed. It became a hub of activity, a place where people learned new skills, found job opportunities, and built relationships that could carry them through the toughest times. And it wasn't just the people who had once been homeless who benefited. It was everyone. Volunteers, donors, and community members alike were touched by the spirit of collaboration, of collective effort. And in the middle of it all, Elon had found something he hadn't even known he was searching for: purpose. The tech mogul who had once seen the world as a series of problems to be solved was now part of something much greater, something that couldn't be solved with a blueprint or a rocket. It could only be solved through the human connection that wove its way through every action, every conversation, every meal shared. It was messy, it was imperfect, but it was real. And that, Elon realized, was all that really mattered. The months passed in what felt like a blur. The community kitchen, with Elon's help and the combined efforts of Clara and the rest of the volunteers, had grown into something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. What had started as a humble initiative to feed those in need had transformed into a lifeline for the community, offering more than just meals, but also opportunities, resources, education, and a renewed sense of hope. Elon had learned a lot in the process. He had learned that not every solution came in the form of a shiny new gadget or an advanced piece of technology. Sometimes, the solution was simply a matter of human connection, of seeing people as more than just their problems, and giving them the space to rebuild their lives on their own terms. One day, as he stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for the afternoon meal, Clara walked over to him with a smile that was contagious. Her eyes gleamed with excitement, and there was a spark in her voice. "Elon, we've got something huge," she said, practically bouncing on her heels. "We just got a grant, one of the biggest ones we've ever received. It's going to allow us to expand the training programs and provide support for even more people." Elon's heart swelled with pride, but also with a sense of gratitude. This wasn't about him. This was about the community, the people who had made this transformation possible, and the ones whose lives were being changed because of their collective efforts. "That's incredible," he said, wiping his hands on his apron. "How are we going to use it?" "We're going to launch an expanded job training program, more mental health services, and create a network of mentors who can work one-on-one with people to help them get back on their feet. It's going to be a game changer for so many people." As Clara explained the details, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the ripple effect they were creating. What they had started with a single meal had now become a force that was reshaping lives, offering opportunities that many had never dreamed possible. But even as the kitchen's success grew, Elon knew that the work was far from over. The challenge now was sustainability. They had built something great, but they couldn't let it plateau. He needed to ensure that the progress they had made didn't stop here, that the community kitchen could continue to thrive and grow, and that its impact could reach even further. That's when he had an idea that, if it worked, could multiply their efforts 100-fold. The idea came to him as he sat in his office late one evening, long after the kitchen had closed for the day. He'd been reflecting on the kitchen's success and on the bigger picture of the work he'd been doing with Clara and the team. He realized that, while the kitchen was doing incredible work, there were other organizations across the country, maybe even around the world, that were doing similar work. There were millions of people in need, and a large network of people and organizations eager to help. What if they could connect these efforts? What if they could create a platform that brought together local community initiatives, shared best practices, and offered resources for those who needed them? Elon immediately set to work, gathering his team of engineers and strategists, explaining his vision. A platform that would serve as a hub for community-driven initiatives, where organizations could share resources, people could find support, and communities could learn from one another. It would be an open-source network, built to grow organically, with no central control. The idea was simple: a collaborative platform that would empower people to help each other, not just in their own neighborhoods, but across the globe. The team was skeptical at first. How are we going to connect these vastly different initiatives? One of his engineers asked. What's going to make it work? Elon smiled. What makes it work is the people. This platform isn't about technology. It's about the human desire to help, to connect. We're just giving them the tools to do it. And that was the spark that began to turn the idea into something real. Elon and his team worked tirelessly, designing the platform and working out the logistics. They spent months gathering data, building partnerships, and ensuring that the platform would be user-friendly for both small nonprofits and large organizations alike. As the platform came to life, Clara was one of the first people Elon reached out to. He told her about the idea, his vision for it, and how he hoped it would help further the work they had already begun at the kitchen. Clara was initially unsure. I mean, it sounds amazing, Elon, but do you really think it'll work? These are local efforts, rooted in specific communities. How can we make it scale? Elon nodded. I get that concern, Clara, but think of it this way. By connecting local efforts, we're not just providing resources. We're creating a community that's global. We'll be sharing knowledge, providing templates, and making sure that organizations across the world have access to the tools they need to succeed. It took time, but as the platform began to take shape, something remarkable happened. Nonprofits, social enterprises, and community leaders from all corners of the globe started reaching out, eager to be a part of the network. They saw the potential of a collaborative space where they could connect with others who shared their values, where they could find new ways to address the challenges they faced in their own communities. Elon watched in awe as the network grew, as partnerships blossomed, and as resources were shared freely across the platform. It wasn't just a success, it was a revolution in the way people approached community work. And it didn't stop there. As the platform gained traction, Elon began receiving messages from people who had used the platform to launch their own community initiatives. People who had once felt powerless to make a difference were now finding the support they needed to create change, all thanks to the ripple effect that had started in the community kitchen. At the heart of it all, Elon realized, was the core principle that had guided him from the very beginning: connection. It wasn't about the technology, the money, or the resources. It was about people. And by giving people the tools to connect, to share, and to empower one another, he had helped create something that was much bigger than any of his past projects. This wasn't just about helping people. It was about creating a movement, one that would spread far beyond the walls of the community kitchen. And as Elon sat back and reflected on the journey that had brought him here, he knew that this was just the beginning. The ripple effect had only just started. Months went by, and the platform continued to grow, becoming an integral part of communities worldwide. What Elon had once seen as a humble, local initiative had evolved into a global network of shared purpose, a space where people from all walks of life could come together, collaborate, and inspire one another to make real change. It was something bigger than he could have ever imagined when he first walked into that community kitchen. One afternoon, Elon stood outside the new expanded space of the kitchen. Clara had invited him to see the fruits of their labor, and he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. The building had tripled in size, now housing classrooms, counseling offices, job training rooms, and even a small community garden in the back. People were bustling around, volunteering, attending classes, and participating in workshops. There was an energy in the air, an optimism that couldn't be ignored. Clara came up beside him, her eyes sparkling with excitement. It's incredible, isn't it? We're not just feeding people anymore. We're offering them a future. Elon nodded, his eyes scanning the busy space. It's beyond what I thought possible. I've always believed in the power of innovation, But this is something else. You didn't just create a space for people to survive. You created a place for them to thrive. Clara smiled. We did it together, Elon. It wasn't just about one person. It was about all of us, coming together with one shared vision. Elon knew she was right. What they had built was not just a network, not just a platform. It was a community. And that sense of community, that shared commitment to lifting one another up, was what made it all possible. They walked through the space, pausing to chat with volunteers and guests. Elon was introduced to a man named Jerry, a former construction worker who had fallen on hard times and had recently been attending job training classes at the kitchen. Jerry had a huge smile on his face as he shook Elon's hand. "I've got a job interview tomorrow," Jerry said with excitement, his eyes bright with hope. "I never thought this would be possible again. I can't thank you enough." Elon smiled back. "It's all you, Jerry. You did the work. We just gave you the tools and support to succeed." Jerry nodded, his voice choked with emotion. "No, man. You gave me something even more important. You gave me my dignity back. And that's worth more than anything." The words hit Elon harder than he expected. Dignity. That was the real gift they had given people. Not just food or shelter or even jobs, but the chance to feel whole again, to feel like they mattered, to be seen and heard. It was something he hadn't truly understood until he'd walked into the community kitchen that first day. As they continued walking through the building, Clara shared the latest numbers with him. Since their expansion, they had seen a 40% increase in people coming through their doors for job training, and nearly 30% of those participants had found stable employment. Mental health services were being used at full capacity, and they had recently launched a mentorship program that had already made a significant impact on people's lives. But beyond the numbers, what impressed Elon the most was the change he saw in the people themselves. They weren't just surviving. They were living. They were finding their voices, their passions, and their place in the world. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was real. "You've created something extraordinary here," Elon said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Clara shook her head. "We did it together, Elon. You were a part of this from the beginning, and you've helped us take it to heights I never thought possible." As the day went on, Elon continued to meet more people, former guests of the kitchen, volunteers, and even other community leaders who had heard about what was happening and wanted to collaborate. Each conversation was a testament to the ripple effect that had started when Elon first went undercover as a homeless man. What had begun as a personal experiment had now blossomed into something far greater, a global network of people working to create change on the most fundamental level. Later that evening, as Elon sat in his office, he reflected on the progress they had made. His mind wandered back to the days when he had been so focused on technological advancements and business ventures, driven by the belief that changing the world meant creating something new, something revolutionary. But what he had learned, through his time at the community kitchen and the platform they had built, was that sometimes the most powerful form of change didn't come from building the next big thing. It came from strengthening the fabric of human connection. And it wasn't just about providing resources or services. It was about fostering a sense of belonging. It was about reminding people of their inherent worth, no matter their circumstances. That night, as he walked through the quiet hallways of the kitchen, he saw something that moved him. A group of former guests were sitting around a table, working together on a community project, a mural that would be displayed outside the building. They laughed and talked as they painted, each person contributing in their own way. They weren't just painting a picture, they were building a future. And that future, Elon realized, wasn't just about the people they were helping. It was about creating a culture of empowerment, a world where everyone had the opportunity to contribute, to grow, and to thrive. As he stood there, watching the mural come to life, Elon felt a deep sense of fulfillment that no business venture, no technological breakthrough had ever given him. This was something different. This was real. But there was still more to do. The global network they had created was growing, and there were more communities to reach, more people to empower. But Elon knew that the work wasn't finished. In fact, it had only just begun. There were still people out there who needed help. There were still communities that hadn't yet found their voice. And Elon was ready to continue the journey. Because now, he understood that the true power of innovation wasn't in the machines or the technology. It was in the people. As the weeks turned into months, Elon found himself more deeply entrenched in the global platform he and Clara had created. The community kitchen, now a bustling hub of activity, continued to thrive in its home base. But Elon's thoughts were constantly turning toward something bigger. How to scale their efforts, how to take the success they had experienced in one city and spread it to others. He knew that if they could replicate the model of empowerment, dignity, and connection, they could transform entire regions, and maybe even entire countries. The first step was expanding the platform. It had already seen success in the US, but what if they could reach international communities facing similar struggles? The need for a united effort was clear. The issues of homelessness, food insecurity, and unemployment were global problems, and the platform could be the solution that connected local efforts to global support. In a series of late-night calls, Elon and Clara strategized with their teams, brainstorming ideas for how to grow their network even further. They worked with partners from international nonprofits, government officials, and local leaders to adapt the platform to the unique needs of different regions. The goal was never to impose a one-size-fits-all solution. Rather, it was to create a flexible, adaptable system that allowed communities to retain their individuality while tapping into the global resources the platform offered. The platform's focus shifted slightly, expanding to include tools for education, healthcare access, mental health support, and job creation. One of the most groundbreaking features was the ability for communities to create localized versions of the platform, where resources could be shared and tailored specifically to each area's needs. This allowed for a community-driven approach where every user could offer help, find support, or access tools to improve their situation. It wasn't easy. Each country they reached out to had its own unique challenges, cultural barriers, political climates, economic disparities, and even language differences. But Elon knew that the only way to make this work was to be patient, to listen, and to learn from the communities they were trying to serve. It was a humbling process, but one that was ultimately rewarding. One particularly challenging experience was in a small village in India. The team had received a request from a local nonprofit that had been working to combat child labor and provide education for children in underprivileged areas. The request was simple: help connect the local efforts with other organizations that could provide resources for education and support for families. Elon and his team, excited by the potential impact, flew to the village to meet with the nonprofit and local leaders. What they found was far from what they had anticipated. The village was struggling not only with the issues of child labor and lack of education, but also with extreme poverty, a lack of clean water, and limited access to healthcare. They realized quickly that a simple educational program wouldn't address the depth of the problems faced by the community. Elon sat down with the village leaders, Clara beside him, and listened carefully to their concerns. It became clear that the community needed a comprehensive solution, one that included healthcare, job training, sustainable farming practices, and access to clean water in addition to education. "I never imagined this level of need," Elon said quietly, his mind racing with the realization that their platform had the potential to address these interconnected issues. Clara nodded in agreement. "But that's why we're here, to help them tackle everything, one step at a time. This platform is more than just a tool for job placement or training. It's a means to connect communities to all the resources they need to rebuild their lives." Elon and Clara immediately pivoted their approach, working with local organizations to connect the village to medical supplies, food donations, job training, and water purification technologies. Slowly, the village began to change. The children no longer worked in the fields, but went to school. Adults were trained in sustainable agriculture, allowing them to grow their own food. Access to clean water improved. And, most importantly, the community's sense of hope was reignited. The experience in India was a turning point for Elon. It showed him that while the platform had the power to provide resources, it was the people, their resilience, their ideas, their hard work, that made the real difference. He and Clara had set out to solve a problem, but they had learned that the real challenge was not simply about providing resources. It was about supporting people in ways that allowed them to take ownership of their own futures. Back in the US, as the platform expanded further, stories began to emerge of small community groups using the platform to tackle local issues in profound ways. A group in a rural area in southern Alabama had launched a campaign to build tiny homes for homeless veterans. A collective in New York City had started a mutual aid fund to support people with medical bills. A group in London had created a mentorship program that connected young adults with professionals in their fields, guiding them toward careers they had once thought out of reach. The ripple effect was undeniable. Communities were transforming. Not only were people finding jobs and housing, but they were also finding purpose. They were creating opportunities for themselves and for others. They were becoming changemakers, empowered by the very platform Elon and Clara had built together. At a gathering of platform leaders from around the world, Elon took the stage to reflect on their progress and to discuss the future. As he spoke to the gathered crowd, he realized just how far they had come. "I've spent my life focusing on technology, on building the next big thing. But what I've learned is that the real power lies not in what we build, but in who we build it for," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We're not just solving problems with apps or algorithms. We're solving problems by empowering people. And that's the real breakthrough." As the applause echoed through the room, Elon felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The platform had become a true force for good, but more importantly, it had become a reflection of everything he had come to believe in over the past year. The power of human connection, the importance of dignity, and the simple, undeniable truth that together, people could accomplish more than they ever could alone. Looking around at the diverse faces of the people in the room, Elon knew that they were just getting started. The impact was only beginning to spread, and with it, a new kind of future was taking shape, a future where every person had the opportunity to thrive. As the global expansion of the platform continued to gain momentum, Elon found himself facing a growing number of questions, some of them critical, others challenging. What had started as an exciting project to help the homeless had evolved into a large-scale, international initiative, and with it came the kind of scrutiny that Elon was no stranger to. Critics, both in the tech world and beyond, began to voice their doubts. It wasn't long before a few well-known industry leaders began questioning the long-term viability of the platform. Can a global, open-source platform really scale without sacrificing the very qualities that make it work? One prominent tech mogul asked during an interview, "Is this just another charity gimmick, or is it something that can truly make a difference long-term?" Elon knew the question would come. After all, many of the initiatives he had spearheaded in the past had been met with skepticism. SpaceX was no different, and so was Tesla. He had always found ways to push through the doubts, but this time, the stakes felt different. This wasn't just about electric cars or rockets. It was about the lives of people, the dignity of communities, and the chance to make a difference on a global scale. One afternoon, as he sat in his office preparing for a press conference, Clara walked in, looking as calm as ever, but with a glint of concern in her eyes. "Elon, have you seen the headlines?" she asked. "People are starting to call the platform a flash in the pan, just another tech experiment that won't last." Elon nodded, looking at the pile of emails and articles that had come through that morning. "I saw. It's the usual. A few people are doubting our approach, asking if this is sustainable long-term. They don't believe a platform can really change things on a global scale." Clara sat down next to him, placing a hand on the table. "You know how this works. We're shaking things up, and shaking things up always makes people uncomfortable. But we've seen results, real results. This isn't just a tech project. This is real change happening in communities. We're giving people a voice, a chance to grow, and that's something worth fighting for." Elon leaned back in his chair, reflecting for a moment. "I know, but there's always this fear, Clara. The fear that we'll burn out. The fear that people will stop believing in it. What if we can't sustain it? What if we lose the very essence of why we're doing this?" Clara smiled knowingly. "I think you know the answer to that already. What if we don't try? What if we listen to the critics and step back? Do you think that's what we should do?" "I don't." Elon took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of clarity wash over him. He had always been driven by a desire to solve problems and make a meaningful impact. This project, this platform, was more than just another tech venture. It was a movement, and movements, he knew, weren't built on convenience. They were built on persistence, on facing the challenges head-on, and continuing to push forward no matter how many doubts were cast along the way. The following day, Elon addressed the criticism directly during a press conference. The room was packed, cameras flashing, journalists eager to hear his response. Standing at the podium, Elon took a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking. "We've heard the concerns, and I understand them. After all, it's easy to doubt something when it challenges the status quo. But here's the thing. We're not trying to create another app or another tech product. What we're doing is creating a platform that connects people, communities, and organizations with the resources they need to help themselves. This is about empowerment. It's about dignity. It's about giving people the tools they need to thrive. And that's not a flash in the pan. That's the future." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. There's always going to be a question of sustainability when you try to do something different, something new. But that's the nature of progress. Change isn't easy, and it never will be. But the people we're working with, those who are struggling, who've been pushed to the margins of society, they're not looking for a quick fix. They're looking for real, lasting change. And that's exactly what we're committed to delivering. Elon's voice was steady, but his words carried a weight that made the room fall silent. He wasn't just defending the platform. He was defending the people it was meant to serve. Later that evening, the press conference was all anyone could talk about. While some remained skeptical, the overwhelming response was one of support. Social media buzzed with people expressing their belief in the platform, in the work they had seen happening on the ground in various communities. A new wave of optimism had been sparked. But for Elon, it wasn't the press or the public opinion that mattered. What mattered was the real impact the platform was having, the difference it was making in people's lives. He was aware that criticisms would come, and that it was a natural part of any major shift. But as he had done time and time again in his career, he would push forward, ensuring that the platform continued to grow and evolve, meeting the needs of communities across the globe. A few days later, Elon received a message from a journalist who had been among the critics, asking if he could interview some of the people who had used the platform. Elon agreed, hoping that seeing the impact firsthand would provide a clearer picture of the platform's value. The journalist, initially skeptical, met with Clara and some of the program's participants. As the interview progressed, the journalist's tone shifted from critical to genuinely intrigued. The success stories were undeniable. From single mothers who had found stable work through the platform's job training programs to veterans who had regained their sense of purpose through volunteer efforts, the stories painted a picture of empowerment and transformation that no amount of skepticism could erase. When the interview was over, the journalist sat back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I didn't expect this," he admitted. "I came in with a lot of doubts. But what you're doing is powerful. You've built something more than just an app. You've built a movement." Elon nodded, feeling a deep sense of relief. For every critic, there was a person whose life had been changed. For every doubt, there was a community that had been empowered. This was bigger than the platform. It was about something deeper, an undeniable truth that no criticism could shake. When people come together, incredible things happen. As Elon and Clara watched their platform grow, they realized something crucial. The initiative needed to evolve from being just a lifeline for people in need to a full-fledged movement. It wasn't just about providing access to resources. It was about breaking down the barriers between people, building understanding, and fostering a sense of shared responsibility. They wanted to inspire people to do more than just take action in their own communities. They wanted to build bridges between disparate groups of society, from business leaders to the homeless, from students to social workers, and from everyday people to activists. This realization led to the next step, creating partnerships. While the platform had primarily been an independent project, it was clear that its true potential could only be realized if they teamed up with organizations, businesses, and governments that shared their vision. And while some were initially hesitant to get involved, many others saw the power of a united front. Elon sat down with Clara one morning in the sleek, glass-walled office they had established for their new venture. They'd been working on partnerships for weeks, and today was a crucial moment. Elon had scheduled a meeting with a well-known corporate sponsor who had expressed interest in joining the cause, but only under very specific terms. The meeting had the potential to either propel the platform to the next level or leave it stalled in the same spot. "I know what they're asking for," Clara said, her voice tense. "They want complete control over how we operate. They want to dictate the vision. I'm just not sure we can let that happen." Elon leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the skyline outside the window. I understand, Clara, but they also have the resources we need to scale, and if they believe in what we're doing, they could open doors we haven't even considered yet. We can't turn down an opportunity for growth, especially when it means reaching more people. Clara crossed her arms, clearly conflicted. I get that, but it's important that we don't lose sight of what we stand for. This is about empowerment, not corporate interests. I don't want to see us become another charity arm of a multinational. Elon nodded slowly. He understood her concerns. Over the years, he'd seen how well-intentioned initiatives could become co-opted by corporate interests. He didn't want that to happen with this platform, but he also knew that if they were going to truly make a difference, they needed a significant boost. I promise you, Elon said, his voice firm, we won't compromise our values. But we need to play the long game here. Sometimes, in order to make the kind of impact we want, we have to make tough decisions. We'll keep the heart of this platform intact, but we need to think about what will give us the tools to push this to a larger audience. Clara didn't respond immediately. She took a deep breath, and finally, her features softened. You're right. We'll give it a try, but I'm going to hold you to that promise. With that, Elon sent a message confirming the meeting with the corporate sponsor. When the day arrived, the boardroom was filled with corporate executives eager to hear about the platform. Elon and Clara made their pitch, emphasizing that the platform was designed to be community-driven, to foster independence, and to remain transparent in its operations. They outlined the benefits of a partnership, from the chance to align their brand with a global social movement to the positive public relations that would come from associating with such a groundbreaking cause. The executives listened carefully, nodding occasionally, but their questions were focused on the potential return on investment. How would this platform scale to a level where it could generate significant revenue? How would they ensure that the initiative wasn't just a non-profit charity effort but a sustainable business? Elon responded with his characteristic confidence. The key to our success will be finding the balance between growth and impact. We're not in this to make a quick profit. We're here to create a lasting movement. And the beauty of the platform is that it's self-sustaining. As it grows, it attracts more users, more community-driven projects, more partnerships. This is a model that grows organically and becomes more powerful as it spreads. After several hours of back-and-forth discussions, the corporate sponsor agreed to partner with the platform under the condition that they maintained full transparency in their operations. There would be no interference with the platform's mission, and the corporate sponsor would have to take a back seat when it came to decision-making. Elon and Clara were cautious, but they understood that this was a significant step forward, one that would allow them to expand more quickly, bringing their mission to an even broader audience. Over the next few months, the platform's network expanded rapidly. Major corporations, universities, and grassroots organizations came on board, all agreeing to collaborate with the platform in various ways. Some provided resources, some offered their expertise, and others donated time or funds. Slowly but surely, the platform became a nexus for people to connect, share resources, and build meaningful relationships. One of the most rewarding aspects of the new partnerships was the way they brought together groups that would normally never interact. Business executives sat side by side with social workers, entrepreneurs worked alongside former homeless individuals, and college students mentored people from all walks of life. The platform had created a space where people weren't defined by their circumstances or their job titles, but by their willingness to help and their commitment to improving the world around them. In one such collaboration, Elon and Clara visited a newly launched initiative in a working-class neighborhood in Detroit. The local community had partnered with a national nonprofit to provide job training and education to young adults who had struggled to find stable employment. With the help of the platform, the community had secured funding for new facilities, including a state-of-the-art training center. As they walked through the center, Clara turned to Elon. This is what it's all about, isn't it? Not just giving people resources, but connecting them to something bigger. You can see it in their faces. They're empowered, they're invested, they're ready. Elon nodded, a sense of fulfillment swelling in his chest. This is exactly what we set out to do. To create a platform that builds bridges between people, between communities. And look at it. We're making it happen. For the first time in months, Elon allowed himself to relax, savoring the moment. They had taken on the critics, they had faced challenges, but they were building something that was real, something that would last. They weren't just helping people survive, they were helping them thrive. And in the process, they were uniting a fractured world, one person at a time. Despite the success, Elon's personal life began to show signs of strain. The platform had grown rapidly, and while the recognition and accolades were rewarding, they came at the cost of time. Time that he used to dedicate to his family and personal relationships. Clara had noticed it too. The long hours in meetings, the constant travel, and the never-ending stream of emails and messages were slowly eroding the balance he had once prided himself on maintaining. It wasn't that he didn't care about the people around him. He did. But the demands of the platform were so all-encompassing that it seemed like there was always something else that required his attention. And each time he tried to take a break or spend time with his children, guilt would set in. It felt like there was always something else that needed fixing, always another problem to solve. It had started subtly at first. A missed birthday party, an anniversary forgotten. Then, a few days ago, his daughter Lily had called him while he was in a meeting. "Dad, are you coming home soon?" she had asked, her voice trembling just a little. Elon had hesitated, his mind juggling multiple things at once. "I'll be home in a few days, honey. I promise." But even as he said the words, he knew he wasn't entirely sure. The platform needed him. His work had become so consuming that it was hard to distinguish between what was truly urgent and what was just the endless tide of demands that came with trying to run an international initiative. Clara had sensed the shift too. Over dinner one evening, she looked across the table at Elon, her eyes filled with concern. "Elon, you've been working non-stop. You're burning the candle at both ends," she said softly. "I know how much you care about this, but you need to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Elon rubbed his face, feeling the weight of her words. "I know, but every time I think I'm done, something else comes up. It's hard to step away when I know how much is at stake. This platform is bigger than me. It's bigger than any of us." Clara reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "It's not just about the platform, Elon. It's about everything else too. The people who love you. They need you too." The silence between them stretched, filled with the unspoken reality of just how much the platform had consumed him. Clara's words struck a chord. He had always prided himself on his work ethic, but he had never imagined that it would come at the cost of his family. And yet, that was exactly what was happening. A few days later, Elon decided to take a break. He told his team he needed some time off to recharge, but the truth was, he wasn't entirely sure how to do that. Taking a step back from the platform felt like taking a step away from the mission that had consumed his every waking thought. But as the plane touched down in his hometown of Palo Alto, he realized that he needed to disconnect. He needed to find some semblance of balance again. When he arrived home, the house felt different. It was quieter. The kids were at school, and Claire was working from the home office. Elon took a deep breath as he walked through the door, feeling both a sense of relief and apprehension. It had been weeks since he had spent any real time here, and it felt strange, almost like coming back to something he wasn't entirely sure he belonged to anymore. He found Claire sitting at her desk, reviewing documents. She looked up when she saw him standing in the doorway. "Elon, you made it back early," she said, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "Everything okay?" Elon nodded, though it felt like a lie. "Yeah, just needed to clear my head. Things have been moving so fast with the platform. I realized I needed some time to focus on what really matters." Claire smiled, setting her papers aside. "I'm glad to hear that. You've been gone so much lately, and I think we both know it's been hard. But I'm here for you. We're here for you." Elon sat down beside her, the weight of the world seeming to lift just a little. He reached for her hand. "I've been so caught up in everything. I haven't been the husband or father I want to be." Claire squeezed his hand. "You're here now. That's what matters. And I think we both know that we need to make some changes, not just for you, but for all of us." Elon knew she was right. It wasn't just about the platform, the business, or the global movement they were creating. It was about family. It was about connections, love, and being present in the lives of the people who mattered most. That evening, they sat together in the living room, talking. Elon found himself opening up in a way he hadn't done in years. It wasn't about the platform or his ambitions. It was about life, the way it had slipped by in the rush to do more, to accomplish more. "I think I need to redefine what success means," Elon said quietly. "It's not about how many people we help or how big the platform gets. It's about being the kind of person who makes time for the people I care about, no matter how much work I have to do. Because if I don't, then what's the point of all of it?" Claire smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "That's the Elon I know. You've always been someone who cares about making a difference. But you can't make that difference if you're not whole yourself." It was a simple truth, one that Elon had always known but had forgotten in the whirlwind of his commitments. As the days passed, he began to create new boundaries for himself. He still remained deeply committed to the platform, but he learned to set aside time for his family. He took weekend trips with the kids, attended Lily's soccer games, and spent evenings reconnecting with Claire. It wasn't easy to balance everything, but he was determined to try. The platform would always be a significant part of his life, but it couldn't be his whole life. There was more to the world than the work he did. There was love. There was family. There was the joy of simply being present. And slowly Elon realized that was the foundation that would make him stronger, not just as a founder, but as a person. With the right balance, he could build a life that was sustainable, not just for the platform, but for everyone around him. With a renewed sense of clarity, Elon was able to find balance in his life. He had made a commitment not only to his platform, but also to his family and personal well-being. The shift in perspective gave him the energy and focus to step back into the world of innovation with a fresh outlook. The platform was still his passion, but now he was determined to guide it in a way that aligned with his values that extended beyond just business goals or public acclaim. It was about creating a legacy that could last, one that would continue to make a real impact on people's lives. However, this new balance wasn't without its challenges. As the platform grew, so did the pressure. Scaling up meant dealing with unforeseen obstacles, tightening regulations, and ensuring that the original vision didn't get diluted in the process. It wasn't long before Elon had to face yet another hurdle, a critical decision regarding the future direction of the platform. As the platform became more successful, corporate interests had started to enter the fold more aggressively. While the partnerships were necessary to keep things moving forward, there was a growing sense that they were starting to steer the platform away from its original mission. The issue came to a head during a meeting with the board of directors. They had proposed an idea that would bring in a substantial amount of revenue but would require significant changes to the platform's approach. The proposed changes included introducing paid features for users and limiting access to certain parts of the platform to paying members. While this would help the bottom line, it went against the core principles of the platform: accessibility, empowerment, and community-driven support. Elon sat at the head of the table, listening as the proposal was presented. Clara, who had always been his trusted advisor, sat beside him, her expression tight. She had been a vocal supporter of the platform's open-source model from the very beginning, and this new direction threatened to compromise everything they had worked for. "Gentlemen," Elon began, his voice steady, "I hear the financial implications of this proposal, but we have to ask ourselves, what do we stand for? What is the core mission of this platform?" The room fell silent. Elon could feel the weight of their stares, the expectation that he would make the call. "We built this platform to give people the tools they need to succeed, not to turn it into a pay-to-play model. We've always prioritized accessibility over profit. If we start charging people for basic services, we're not empowering them anymore. We're exploiting them." "I understand the concerns about revenue," Elon continued, "but we're not going to sacrifice our mission for the sake of short-term profits. We'll find other ways to generate income, ways that align with our values. But we're not going to create divisions among the people we're trying to help." There was a long pause. Finally, the board members seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The proposal, while financially promising, was ultimately shelved. Elon had made it clear that the platform's success would not be measured by how much money it generated, but by how much it changed lives. In the days that followed, Elon took a step back to reflect on the decision. It was a pivotal moment, one that tested his commitment to the platform's founding principles. But he felt a deep sense of pride in standing by those values, knowing that the platform was a force for good in the world. As the platform continued to grow, Elon and Clara focused on strengthening the community aspect of their work. They created more partnerships with local businesses and organizations, ensuring that the platform remained community-driven and accessible to all. They also introduced new features that allowed users to directly contribute to each other's success, whether by mentoring others, providing resources, or offering advice. Elon also focused on the personal connections he had made through the platform. He began reaching out to users whose stories had deeply moved him, taking the time to hear their experiences and offer support. It wasn't about making headlines or being seen as a hero. It was about ensuring that the platform remained human, personal, and grounded in the very reason it had been created, to help people. During a particularly emotional meeting with a user in a small rural town, Elon realized just how much this platform had meant to people. The man, a single father who had struggled to make ends meet for years, shared how the platform had helped him access job training and connect with local businesses. With the skills he had learned, he was able to secure a well-paying job and support his family in ways he never thought possible. "I don't know where I'd be without this platform," the man said, tears in his eyes. "It's more than just a job. It's changed my life. It's given me hope." As Elon listened to his story, he was reminded once again of why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. It wasn't about the accolades or the media attention. It was about the people, their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. It was about changing lives, one person at a time. Later that night, Elon sat in his office, reflecting on everything he had learned. He was still driven by his desire to make the world a better place, but he now understood that true success wasn't just about achieving big milestones. It was about staying grounded in the human connections that made those milestones meaningful. The platform would continue to grow, evolve, and face challenges. But as long as it remained true to its mission, to empower people, to help them build a better future for themselves, the future looked bright. As Elon and Clara continued to expand the platform's reach, they were faced with an unexpected challenge: a cybersecurity breach. The platform, which had been heralded as a safe space for people to share their stories and seek help, suddenly became the target of a sophisticated attack. Information was compromised, and sensitive data was leaked. Elon received the news while attending a global conference on technology and social impact. He'd been speaking on a panel about the importance of digital platforms in fostering community-driven change when his phone buzzed with an urgent notification. It was from Clara. "Elon, we've been hacked. There's a breach in the system. Sensitive user data may have been compromised. We need to act fast." His heart sank. This was the worst possible scenario. The platform had been built on trust, and now that trust was under threat. The team had worked tirelessly to create a system that was secure and transparent. But it seemed that no matter how many precautions they took, the ever-evolving world of cyber threats was always one step ahead. Elon immediately excused himself from the panel and stepped into a quiet corner of the venue. He quickly dialed Clara's number, his mind racing with questions. "Clara, what happened?" he asked, trying to steady his breath. "We're still investigating the full extent of it, but it looks like someone gained access to the database." Clara's voice came through, calm but laced with urgency. "We've activated the emergency protocols, but we need your decision on whether to shut down the platform temporarily while we investigate." Elon stood in the corner of the conference hall, feeling the weight of the decision bearing down on him. The platform had grown far beyond what they had ever expected, and now it was at risk of crumbling under the pressure of a cyber attack. They had always prided themselves on maintaining the integrity of the platform, and the last thing they wanted was to cause panic among their users. "I don't want to shut it down," Elon said, his voice firm, "but we need to protect the users. Let's take everything offline temporarily. We'll issue a public statement and reassure them that we're working on it." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I agree. I'll coordinate with the tech team and start drafting the message." After the call, Elon felt a pang of guilt. The platform had been a lifeline for so many people. To shut it down, even temporarily, felt like a betrayal. But he knew it was the right decision. Security had to come first. Trust had to be rebuilt. Back at the headquarters, Clara and the tech team worked tirelessly to identify the source of the breach. For days, Elon found himself pacing the floors of the office, checking in on progress and communicating with the PR team to ensure that the message to the platform's users was clear and transparent. The days felt long. The platform's downtime had begun to draw attention in the media, and questions from the press flooded in. Every journalist seemed to have their own theory on what had happened and what it meant for the future of the platform. "We're committed to resolving this issue as quickly as possible," Elon said in a statement to the press. "Our users' safety and privacy are our top priority, and we're taking every step to ensure this never happens again." But no matter how many statements he gave, the weight of the situation didn't lift. The breach had shaken him to his core. The platform wasn't just a business venture, it was a mission. And right now, it felt like everything they had worked for was hanging in the balance. Then, late one night, Clara called him into the office. "Elon, I think we found it," she said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "The source of the breach. It's a third-party vendor we were working with. They had a vulnerability in their security system, and it gave the hackers access to our database." Elon's heart sank further. The breach hadn't been due to any fault of their own internal system. It had come from an outside partner. Still, the damage had been done. The question now was how to move forward. "We need to sever all ties with that vendor immediately," Elon said, his voice cold with resolve. "And we need to notify all affected users. We'll offer them support, and we'll be fully transparent about what happened." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The team worked around the clock to identify all of the affected accounts, inform users, and offer resources for those whose information had been compromised. Elon knew that this wasn't just about fixing the technical issue. It was about restoring trust. They had to show the world that they were still the platform people could rely on. In the wake of the breach, many of the platform's loyal users rallied together. Support forums were flooded with messages of understanding and encouragement. It was a humbling reminder that, at the heart of it all, the community that had been built was stronger than any technological hurdle. Elon personally wrote a letter to the platform's users, acknowledging the breach and offering a heartfelt apology. "We failed you," he wrote, "and for that, I am deeply sorry. But we are committed to making things right. We will learn from this, and we will make this platform stronger than ever before." In the months that followed, the platform rebuilt its security protocols from the ground up, implementing stronger measures and working with top-tier cybersecurity experts. Elon and Clara also made the difficult decision to sever ties with any third-party vendors who didn't meet the highest standards of security. But perhaps the most important step in the recovery process was the way they chose to communicate with their users. Instead of hiding behind corporate jargon or avoiding tough questions, they kept the lines of communication open. They provided regular updates on their progress and made sure that every person who had been affected by the breach received the help they needed. Through it all, Elon realized something crucial. The platform wasn't just about technology, it was about the people who used it. And when everything seemed to be falling apart, it was the community that held them together. It wasn't easy, and it took time. But in the end, the platform emerged from the breach stronger than ever. Trust had been broken, but it was slowly being rebuilt, piece by piece. As he sat back in his office one evening, looking out at the city below, Elon reflected on everything he had learned. The challenges they faced were monumental, but they had only made him more determined to protect the vision they had worked so hard to create. Because, at the end of the day, it wasn't the platform that mattered most, it was the people. Months had passed since the breach. Elon's team had worked tirelessly to restore the integrity of the platform, and while they had made significant strides, the scars left by the attack were still fresh. Despite the setbacks, Elon had learned a valuable lesson. No matter how much technology could transform the world, it was still human trust that formed the foundation of everything. One evening, as he sat in his office late into the night, he couldn't help but reflect on how far the platform had come. What began as a vision to create a more accessible, community-driven space had now grown into something far greater than he ever expected. It wasn't just about connecting people to resources anymore. It was about giving them the tools to create meaningful change in their own lives. But even with the progress made, Elon felt a lingering sense of unease. There was one final piece of the puzzle left to address, an issue he had been avoiding. The potential long-term consequences of what the platform had become. Had they pushed too far, too fast? Could they truly maintain their original mission? Or were they at risk of becoming just another corporate entity driven by profit rather than purpose? It was a question that had been gnawing at him for weeks, and he knew, deep down, that he couldn't move forward without answering it. One evening, as he sat across from Clara in their home, he decided to voice his concerns. "Clara, I'm not sure anymore," Elon began, his voice laced with frustration. "I've been so focused on growing the platform, on making it bigger and better, that I've lost sight of why we started this in the first place. We built something beautiful, something that changed lives. But now, it's becoming just another tech company. I'm not sure how to bring it back." Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. She had seen the toll the pressure had taken on him, but she also knew that Elon wasn't one to give up when things got tough. "You've always said it's not about the money," Clara said softly. "It's about the mission. Maybe what you need is to focus on that again, to bring the heart back into it. The people don't want another product. They want what you promised them, a platform that listens, that empowers." Elon let her words sink in. The truth was, he had lost sight of the very thing that made the platform special. They had built something that was fundamentally human, not just a business. And that human element, the connection, the trust, the sense of community, was something that could never be replaced by technology alone. The next morning, Elon gathered his leadership team for an emergency meeting. Clara was by his side, and he could feel the weight of the decision ahead of him. It wasn't just about fixing a problem. It was about redefining the entire future of the platform. He addressed the team, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "We've come a long way, but we've also strayed from the path. We built this platform to change lives, and somehow, we lost sight of that in the pursuit of growth. Now, it's time to ask ourselves, what do we want to be?" There was a long silence as the team absorbed his words. The room was filled with brilliant minds who had helped bring the platform to life. But they, too, had seen the shift, the increasing demands for profitability and market share. "We've become part of the very system we wanted to disrupt," Elon continued. "We need to take a step back, reevaluate our mission, and rebuild this from the ground up, focusing not just on the people who use our platform, but on the way they interact with each other, the way we support each other." Clara nodded, her presence a reminder of the values they had started with. The mission had always been about giving people power. Power to change their own lives, power to help others, and power to build a better future. But that mission couldn't be achieved if they lost their way, if they became too focused on metrics and revenue streams. Over the next few months, the team worked on implementing radical changes. They shifted the platform's approach back to its roots, empowering communities, creating a space where users didn't just participate but thrived. They introduced new features that prioritized human connection, tools for mentorship, for collaboration, for emotional support. They worked to eliminate unnecessary barriers, making the platform as inclusive and accessible as possible. But the most important change wasn't the technology, it was the culture. Elon and Clara made it clear that the platform's success would be measured not by its profitability, but by the lives it impacted. They encouraged the team to listen to users' stories, to understand their needs, and to create features that could help them fulfill their goals. One evening, as the new platform model went live, Elon found himself reflecting on the journey. The past year had been filled with challenges and uncertainty, but in the end, it had led to a breakthrough, a deeper understanding of what really mattered. Elon stood on the balcony of his home, looking out at the city lights. It had been a long and difficult road, but he finally felt at peace with the direction they had chosen. The platform was back on track, and it was stronger than ever, because it wasn't just about the technology. It was about the people who made it what it was. The next day, he sent a message to the platform's users, thanking them for their continued support. "We've made mistakes," he wrote, "but we're committed to making it right. This platform belongs to you, and together, we can create something even greater. Thank you for trusting us." The response was overwhelming. Thousands of users commented, offering words of encouragement and gratitude. They believed in the platform, in the vision, and in Elon's ability to steer it back to its original purpose. And as Elon read the messages, He realized that it wasn't just about building a platform that could change lives. It was about staying true to the heart of the mission, the heart that had always been there, guiding him through every challenge, every setback, and every triumph. The journey had come full circle. Elon had found his way again, back to the core of what mattered most. And in doing so, he had ensured that the platform would continue to empower and inspire people for years to come. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?